Good afternoon. Congresswoman Jackie Spear, Congresswoman Lynn Woolsey, Asia Foundation trustees, excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished guests. We're deeply honored to welcome this afternoon Daw Aung San Suu Kyi to San Francisco and to the Asia Foundation. To all of us here and to millions of people around the world, our guest today has truly been an inspiration. She's inspired us with her personal sacrifice, her incredible courage, and her unwavering commitment to the values of human rights, freedom, and democracy. By now, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi's personal and political journey is familiar to us all. For over 2 decades, she endured harassment, separation from her family, house arrest in her struggle for a free and democratic Burma. With the recent political reforms and democratic opening in Burma, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi has been transformed from a democracy icon to a parliamentary leader. This past April, Burma held parliamentary by-elections in which she and members of the National League for Democracy won 43 of 45 vacant seats. Today, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi joins us as the leader of the largest opposition party in the Burmese parliament, and also as chair of the Parliamentary Committee, I love this title, on the Rule of Law and Tranquility. She has worked effectively with President Thein Sein in a spirit of cooperation and compromise to advance democratic reform and improve the lives of the people of Burma. This past summer, for the first time in decades, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi left Burma to visit Thailand and to embark on a European tour where she was finally able to accept the Nobel Peace Prize awarded to her in absentia in 1991. Last week, I was fortunate to be in Washington when she received the Congressional Gold Medal and began her historic 18-day visit to the United States, her first visit in almost 40 years. In the past 2 weeks, she has received so many richly deserved awards and honors that her trip must feel like the fitting conclusion to a long and arduous journey. But as she herself has recognized, Burma's journey is just beginning. Aung San Suu Kyi and her reform-minded colleagues in government have a long road ahead to achieve national reconciliation, democracy, and development in Burma. We at the Asia Foundation are committed to assisting Daw Suu Kyi and the people of Burma as they continue on the path of reform. We have a long history of working with Asian leaders to build and strengthen democratic institutions, promote economic development, and advance the rule of law. Indeed, the Asia Foundation was active in Burma from 1954 to 1962 and has reactivated our Books in Asia program there since 2007, shipping more than 80,000 books to Burma in the last 5 years. During the past year, our staff has made several visits to lay the groundwork for an expanded program in Burma, and next month I will be in Naypyidaw to present a special collection of books and reference materials to the Parliamentary Library. We're looking forward to reestablishing a country office in Burma next year with the goal of providing concrete assistance to Burma's reform and development efforts. Burma's democratic transformation has been peaceful, rapid, and encouraging. We know that these developments will result in greater political participation and economic opportunity for Burma's people, and even more positive changes to come. People across the globe and in Burma have high hopes for their country's future. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, you can be assured of our steadfast support as you continue to lead your country on the path to democracy and reconciliation. Let me conclude by saying how moved we are by your vision of Burma's future as a free, democratic, and open nation. We thank you for all that you have done, and we look forward to your continued leadership in the years to come. And now I invite you to please join me in extending a warm welcome to Daw Aung San Suu Kyi.
Thank you. Thank you for a very warm welcome, for giving me the opportunity to talk about some of the challenges which face Burma. Everybody has been speaking about how quickly change has come to Burma. And I would like to say that it is important that we make haste sensibly, not haste slowly, because everybody wants speed these days, but haste sensibly, that we should get both speed and sequencing right. This is what I consider one of the most difficult challenges at this time. Everybody wants to help Burma, but I think help has to be coordinated. It has to be thought through so that it comes in the right way and to the right places. It's not enough to help a country which is emerging from dictatorship into democracy. It has to be helped in such a way that the foundations of a democratic society would be strengthened. This, of course, means empowering the people. I have been touched, but also worried by the numbers of people who want to rush into Burma to help. One economist has referred to the gold rush of investors, and he has warned against welcoming such a gold rush without considering the possible negative effects which might well come. We want investors to be responsible. We want friendly investors, friendly meaning to say democracy friendly and human rights friendly. I've noticed that all those who are about to invest in Burma all claim that they're democracy friendly and human rights friendly. And they all emphasize that aspect of their investments, which would promote democratic values. Some months ago, when I was speaking to the World Economic Forum in Thailand, I spoke of the need for healthy skepticism. This did not go down well with my government. The official newspapers translated as the good health of negativity and attacked me for not supporting the reform process. Well, I will stick to my guns. I'm not one of the military, so I may stick to my guns and say that there is a need for healthy skepticism. Because reform, in order to succeed, must be carried out in the right way. From the very beginning, the how matters as much as the what and the how much. How are we going to go about helping the people of Burma? And I think it is not a bad idea for friends to look at us with a critical eye. Are we making the kind of progress that can be sustained? Are we making the kind of progress that will enable our people to carry on the task of building a democratic society? Because ultimately, it is the people of my country who must decide what they want and how they are going to obtain it, and what kind of democracy they want for themselves. Because democracy differs from country to country. I'm not in favor of the phrase that was used by the military regime, which was replaced by a civilian one 2 years ago. I never liked the phrase disciplined democracy. This was what the military regime said we should head towards, disciplined democracy. I consider that phrase a way of indicating that democracy will be given to the extent that the then military regime considered necessary for the country. Democracy has its own disciplines, and these disciplines must come from the people themselves. These must be disciplines imposed by the people on themselves in the knowledge that they, as citizens of a democratic nation have responsibilities as well as rights. It is not for external organizations or external forces to impose discipline on people who genuinely wish to live in a democratic society. So, I'll repeat myself, a little bit of healthy skepticism is quite in order, in my opinion. We must be very critical of the way in which the reforms are being implemented. It is easy enough to say that we want reform. It is easy enough to say that we need economic, political, and social reforms. But we must also consider whether these reforms, in fact, actually empower the people or simply strengthen central government rule. The President himself has spoke about the need for decentralization, but words have to be backed up by deeds. We have noticed that although reform measures have been approved by the central government, at the local level, things have changed very little. Our people at the local level do not feel much freer now than they did 2 years ago. This will indicate to you what I mean by saying that reform must be the kind of reforms that are felt by the people. If the people do not feel that their lives have been changed by the reform measures, then I do not think we can say that these reforms are satisfactory. Economic reforms. At the moment, Burma is inviting investors. As I said earlier, we would like the right kind of investment, the kind of investments that will create jobs and also provide our young people with on-the-job training. For 5 decades, our education system has been grossly neglected. Because of that, our young people are ill-prepared to take on the jobs that might come to us with new investment. So when investment is made to create jobs, we have to have young people and older people, but I talk especially about younger people because there is such high youth unemployment. We must have young people who are qualified to take on these jobs. At the moment, we are trying our best to promote non-formal education and vocational training to make up for the years during which our young people were so ill-educated. I sometimes see young people, or perhaps not so young, people under the age of 55 as the lost generations. You can see very clearly in Burma that people above the age of 55 are better educated than those below that age. This fits in with the years when the Burma Socialist Program Party consolidated its grip on power in Burma and reduced our education system from a vibrant one, much respected in our region as well as in the rest of the world, to one which was experimental in nature and which did not take into account either the needs of the country or the future of our younger generations. These young and not so young, I keep thinking of them as young people because, of course, compared to me, they're young. These people under the age of 55 will have to work very hard to make up for those lost years. And for those under 40, we'll have to work very hard to provide them with the kind of additional training that will prepare them for the duties that will certainly fall on their shoulders before too long. So when we look at the prospects and challenges that Burma is facing now, they are the political ones, the economic ones, and the social ones to do with health and education. I have mentioned earlier the economic challenge of inviting and getting the right kind of investment. With regard to the political challenges, I would like to emphasize that a democracy is made up of 3 main institutions: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. I do not think that enough attention has been paid to all these institutions, particularly the judiciary. The best economists agree that even economic progress will depend very much on whether or not there is rule of law in the country. investors will not feel safe unless they can be sure that their interests will be protected by the rule of law. This is why the Speaker of the lower house decided to get together a committee for the rule of law and tranquility. Of course, it all makes you smile, but I'm sure you see the obvious connection. If there is no rule of law, you cannot feel safe even in your own home. This we have seen for ourselves. Through the years, to more than 20 years, from 1988 to 2010, people have not been safe in their own homes. Those who were involved in politics could never tell when the police would not knock at their door and ask them to follow them to they did not know where. Their families would not be told to which place they were being taken. They would not be told for how long they would be kept away from their homes. Such occurrences were everyday fare for over 20 years. And now that we have started out on the path to democratization, we have to be certain that all our citizens are protected by the rule of law. But how can we have rule of law unless we have an independent, clean, and educated judiciary? Over the years, the caliber of our judges, as well as our lawyers, has fallen. Over the years, our courts have ceased to be independent and just. Over the years, our people have stopped depending on the law to protect their rights. In fact, over the years, many of our people have ceased to know what their rights really are. So we have to start from scratch. I am emphasizing the judiciary because I am concerned with the re-establishment of rule of law in our country. But very closely linked to the work of the judiciary is the legislature, because it's the legislature which makes and amends laws. And rule of law, of course, has to do with substance as well as procedure. The substance will be decided by the legislature, and the procedure by the various departments concerned, such as the police, the Attorney General's office, the Defense Ministry, and the Information Ministry. Because rule of law, to be established, must be made known to the people. Our people must understand what we mean by the rule of law, and our people must understand what part they have to play in upholding the rule of law. Since 1995, my party, the National League for Democracy, started forming small legal aid committees. To begin with, these committees were to defend political activists who were taken to court and imprisoned for activities which the government considered hostile to them. As the years progressed, our legal aid committee has helped ordinary citizens as well, trying to help them to defend their rights. But before helping them to defend their rights, we had to teach them what their rights were. At present, we have a number of these legal aid committees all over the country, linked together by what we call our legal aid network, which started towards the end of 2011. This kind of legal aid given to citizens in order to educate them with regard to their rights is an essential part of the re-establishment of rule of law in our country. Once we can say that progress is equally good on all three fronts, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, then we can say that our process of democratization is going well. I would not use the word irreversible. I do not think that you can ever say that any process is irreversible. I have to remind our friends that when Burma was taken over by the military regime, we were a practicing democracy. And so were many countries in which military coups took place, and then democratic governments would be replaced by military dictatorships. So we can never say any process is irreversible, But we can work to reach a point when it would be difficult and even painful to reverse the process. This means that the process must be beneficial to all concerned, all the forces in the country who will decide what shape our society is going to take politically as well as socially. So this is the challenge, a unified approach to the democratization process, a unified approach between the executive, the legislature, and as yet almost non-existent judiciary, and the armed forces. Many of you will have studied the situation in Burma because as you are interested in developments in Asia, I'm sure you have been interested in recent developments in Burma. And if you have studied the Constitution of 2008, you will notice that the military is given undue influence over all powers of governance, in the sense that they are in a position to take over all powers of governance anytime that they think it is necessary. With this clause and other clauses in the Constitution, which provide for an overwhelming military influence over our political and governmental systems, we cannot say that we are well on the road to democracy. But changes in the Constitution will have to be brought about through the willing consent of the military, because we want change to come about in a non-violent, peaceful way. So the executive, the legislature, and the military must work together to ensure that our democratic institutions gather strength from day to day. We are all impatient because we have waited 50 years for change to come. 1962 was the year when the army coup of the year when democratic government was replaced by a military regime. So now we are 2012. 50 years is half a century. Half a century is a long time to wait. Many of our people have not been able to wait. Some of those who were most worthy of seeing democracy will never see it come to our country. So it is now up to all of us who remain to make sure that the transition comes as peacefully and as quickly as desirable. I'm not saying as possible, but as desirable, because I do not believe that we can get to where we want to get to if we simply put the emphasis on speed and not on other considerations as well. During this visit to the United States, I have found an enormous fund of goodwill here for our country. So many people have been asking me what they can do to help. I'm grateful for this goodwill, and I would like you to help. But I would like you to help with caution, with intelligence, and with the awareness that help given in the wrong way can lead to negative results, which will lead, again, in its turn, to the kind of end that you had never expected. So please help us, but in the right way. Please help us, but thoughtfully. Please help us, but with proper sequencing as well as with the right speed. I'm sure, now that's 15 minutes, so I must stop. I'm sure that many of you will have questions to ask about particular aspects of the change process in Burma. So I think I can stop now and say thank you very much for listening so patiently, and thank you very much for the interest that you're taking in my country. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for agreeing to answer questions. And there are an abundance of questions that have been posed both by members of the audience as well as some of our media guests. And One which I think is personal, inquires about your years of house arrest and whether during the time that you were confined to your home, you had doubts and whether you actually believed that you would witness the political changes that have been taking place in Burma. And related to that, do you fear that the pendulum may swing back and that there could be a backlash against the democratic reforms? I think so.
Well, I don't think anything unbelievable has happened yet. When you ask that, I do believe what is happening, because we have not quite got to the point when it's unbelievable. When we have got to the point when we can say that Burma has put down strong democratic roots, then perhaps I might think, oh, well, this is unbelievable. But so far, I don't think anything is unbelievable, and certainly I never doubted that our cause would prevail.
A question about Burma's rich natural resources and your comments earlier about the importance of responsible investment and responsible development. What role do you see natural resources playing in terms of Burma's economic growth and development, and what kind of investment would you consider to be responsible in the natural resource sector?
Well, I'm sure everybody has heard of the resources curse, and we certainly suffered under it for many years, because these natural resources enabled the military government to go its own way without worrying too much about where the income was going to be derived from. The extractive industries are a particular worry. This is why we as the National League for Democracy has been very insistent about the need for the country to sign up to the EITI agreement. And I understand that the government has decided to do so. Transparency is very important. Our natural resources can be a great help to us only if they are developed in the right way. Unfortunately, most extractive industries do not create too many jobs, and they also have effects on the environment. Now, in my country, we have to be aware of the fact that many of our natural resources are to be found in the areas where our ethnic nationalities live. So it's not just a matter of environmental degradation that we have to worry about. It is about not being sensitive enough to the aspirations and to the anxieties of our ethnic nationalities. So if we go about exploiting our natural resources without giving due thought both to the sensitivities of our ethnic nationalities who live in those areas and to the environment itself, there could be undesirable consequences. So we would say that if there are foreign investors interested in the resources of Burma, we would like them to be transparent. We would like to know what they want to do and where and in which way. Transparency is the key.
This question is in relation to the Silicon Valley and the fact that this is your first visit to the Bay Area. And the question is whether any of the high-tech Silicon Valley types are already starting to come into Burma as part of the gold rush. And what role do you see the technology sector playing in terms of Burma's future development?
I think technology will have to play an important part in Burma's development, as in that of any other country in the world. So far, of course, we are not too far advanced with technology. I think only 0.2% of our people have access to the internet, and that, you can imagine, is not a very big figure. We will have to make progress in that area, and I understand that young Burmese people have a particular aptitude for IT. I do not know whether they were born this way or whether, whether it's the environment in which they've grown up. That would be very strange to believe that it's the environment in which they have grown up which has made them so technology inclined. But we have great hopes for the future of Burma. I do not know whether there will be another Silicon Valley in Burma. To begin with, I think we would just like enough cell phones and enough computers and enough access to the internet.
This question poses the challenge of Burma as a multi-ethnic community and says, while there's overwhelming support for democracy in Burma, not everyone has the same vision. How do you envision a multi-ethnic representational system that will protect the rights of minorities and ensure inclusiveness?
Well, we'll have to now talk about federalism. For years and years, the military regime has attacked the word federal because they said that federal means right to secede from the nation. This, of course, is not true. And the National League for Democracy has supported the demand of the ethnic nationalities for a federal form of government, understanding that federalism does not mean secession. And the great majority of our ethnic nationality peoples do not want right of secession. They simply want equality and autonomy. Now then, I have to ask what exactly they mean by equality and autonomy. And this is something that will have to be discussed across the table. At the moment, peace negotiations are going on in the Kachin state, and ceasefires have been signed with other ethnic nationality organizations. But I also understand that this does not mean an end to fighting. I understand that fighting is still going on in some areas where ceasefires have already been signed. So there is so much that we have to do. In the end, in a multi-ethnic society, we have to talk to one another. I've studied many papers with regard to conflict resolution, with regard to building harmony out of diversity, and it all comes down to one way of starting, that is dialogue, negotiation. You talk to one another, you learn from one another, you learn to respect one another's point of view. It all starts that way. But how it goes on is a different thing. I have been told that the peace negotiations which the Burmese authorities are conducting are not structured enough to bring about the kind of results that we would like to see within a reasonable length of time. So it is how we carry out these negotiations just as much as what these negotiations are going to be about that will help us to build a kind of multi-ethnic society in which all our peoples can live under the rule of law in tranquility.
For many of us who have been observing Burma from outside, the suddenness of the change has been a cause of great mystery. And we would love to know, in your view, what was the major cause or impetus for the regime to change and to move in the direction of the kind of democratic opening that we've seen?
I have been asked this question so often, and I've had an opportunity to discuss it with many people who are interested in Burma. And thinking about it, I think it was not as sudden as might appear on the surface. After due discussion, I've come to the conclusion that we have to go back to 2003, when this so-called 7-step roadmap was first proposed by the then military regime. And this 7-step roadmap did include the democratization process at the end, after the elections. So after elections were held in 2010, well, first of all, of course, there was the constitution that had to be adopted. That was part of the roadmap. This was achieved in 2008, and after that there were the elections. And I think, in a way, one could say that the democratization steps that were taken after the elections was in keeping with the roadmap that was drawn up in 2003. So if we look at it that way, these changes have not been as sudden or should not have come as such a surprise as most people seem to view it.
You've spoken about the notion of federalism as one way to begin to address the multi-ethnic needs of Burma. The questions, two questions. One is, do you envision Burma moving in the direction of becoming a federal state, including states outside of the Burman center? And secondly, how do you see the local government entities growing and evolving in ways that enable local authorities to be responsive to the needs of their citizens?
Well, let me take you the other way around, starting with the local authorities first. I mentioned this earlier, that although change has been advocated by the center, in the local context, there has not been enough change. Our people do not feel change at the ground level, at the grassroots level. So we will need to strengthen local government. We will need to strengthen local authority. And many of our friends who want to help us can help us in that way. When they help us with development aid, when they help us with humanitarian aid, and when they help us with the strengthening of our institutions, we would like them to concentrate on strengthening local government, local authority. Now, this would be a step in the right direction towards the kind of multi-ethnic society that our ethnic nationalities wish for. When you say, do I envision a federal state? If you mean, do I see the possibility, or do I see a vision of a state in which all our ethnic nationalities can live together in harmony under a federal system? Yes. But if you mean, do I envision one in the sense that, do I see one emerging in the near future? I cannot see any steps that have so far been taken that are moving in that direction.
This question has to do with U.S. policy, and the question is really, from your perspective, what kind of support should the U.S. government be prepared to offer to President Thein Sein and to the government of Burma? What form should that sort of assistance take? And the questioner poses the question, does President Thein Sein deserve American support?
I was just going to say that we should not think of the United States as helping President Thein Sein or helping the government of Burma, but helping the people of Burma. I think that is how they should view it, that the United States government and all other governments, all other countries who wish us well, should think in terms of how they can help the people of Burma.
Two questions about the rush into Burma. One has to do with the impact that it's having on rents in Yangon, which are shooting up, and whether you worry about the ill effects, the side effects of a major input of foreign assistance and aid.
Well, I've already told you that I worry. I worry about the emphasis on speed rather than on sensible sequencing. So I do worry, and I know about the rents, and I think this is putting off some of our would-be investors who I've met some from ASEAN countries who have said that the high rents asked by Burmese landlords are quite unreasonable, and that has made them rethink their ideas of investing in Burma.
Corruption. Could you comment on the extent to which corruption is a problem in different sectors of society, and do you worry about it particularly as it relates to the parliament?
Corruption, of course, is rampant in Burma, but so far as I know, the parliament has not been involved in any corruption scandal. It's very young, and we hope to keep it young and innocent, and to keep it still innocent as it matures. I'm a little surprised that you spoke about corruption and parliament, because so far we have not been aware of any corruption accusations or scandals related to the parliament. But of course, with regard to the civil services, to government in general, there is a lot of corruption. There has been for many years. There still is. And this is going to be a big problem to tackle.
International relations, Burma's relations with its neighbors in ASEAN and with China. Could you offer some general insights and perspectives?
Well, first of all, of course, we can't move away from our neighbors. I've been repeating this time and again. So we have to get on with them. I always I usually say that you can divorce your spouse these days, but we can't move away from our neighboring countries. So we have to be nicer to our neighboring countries than we might be to our spouses. But we have a good record of friendly relations with all our neighbors. From the time of independence, Burma managed to maintain a policy of neutrality and of friendship with all its neighbors. Under the military regime, there were times when Burma and Thailand had little misunderstandings, but these were usually cleared up before too long. And with regard to India and China, of course, there's a lot of talk about strategic interests and about each one trying to neutralize the other. But in the days when we had a parliamentary democracy, the Burmese government had good, friendly relations with both India and China, and with the United States too. And I do not see why we should not be able to carry on in this tradition. And of course, as a member of ASEAN, our relations with other countries in Southeast Asia have become much closer.
This is a personal question about your own experience during many, many years of house arrest. And the question is, how did you endure it? What were the coping mechanisms that you used to survive?
Well, I've had to explain very, very often that it was not such a terrible experience. I was kept in the house, but since I'm not the sort of person who likes to go out too much, and well, I've never been fond of gadding about. It was not too hard for me. I had books, I had a shortwave radio, I had a piano, and well, what more could I want? When you think of my colleagues who were in prison and hardly had enough to eat, I was very, very well off. And I did not think that it was very difficult to cope with at all.
And you didn't get a dog?
No, I didn't get a dog. I think the dog might have found it rather difficult.
A question about the textile and apparel industry, which would seem to be a natural for Burma. From your perspective, what would be your advice for the responsible development of the textile industry in Burma?
A lot of people hope that the garment industry will put Burma's economy on its feet. I think perhaps that is a little simplistic. In a way, I think this is harking back to 20th century development methods, because garment factories were very much the 20th century way of making the economy pick up. And when you think of China, and then later of Bangladesh, Vietnam, etc. But now I wonder how much we can hope to achieve through garment industries. But it is still a popular notion. Our people themselves think that garment industries would help them would create jobs for them. And then in the villages, I can see that in my township, a lot of the women want to be part of the garment industry. It's not that they want to go to work in a factory, but they want sewing machines, and they want to be able to produce garments in their homes, on their sewing machines, and arrange for it all to be collected in a factory or in a business from which it can be distributed or even sent abroad. So there is still the perception that garment industries will play an important part in the revitalization of the economy. I'm not sure that I subscribe to the view. I think there will be garment factories. I think there will be garment factories set up by foreign investors. But I think we've got to think in a new and different way as well.
A question about the role of the military. You spoke about the need for careful, steady change, and with the political, executive, the legislative branch, and the military being engaged. What, in your view, is the best way for the military to engage in that process? And speaking realistically, how do you think it actually will engage in the process of moving further down the road toward democratization?
There is, of course, a military bloc in the legislature. I think many of you will know that 25% of percent of the seats in all the assemblies, the national ones as well as the regional ones, are occupied by nominated members of the military. So the engagement of the military practically will begin within the legislature. And while many people consider the 25% in the military, of military in the National Assembly as one of the worst signs of an undemocratic democracy, I am not really too much against it, because it does give us the opportunity to engage with the military and for the military to see how the civilian part of the legislature works. It all comes down to what I said earlier. You talk to one another, you negotiate.
Two questions related to human rights. One related to the Human Rights Commission in Burma. What steps do you see as being necessary in order to strengthen the role of an independent Human Rights Commission? And secondly, do you advocate a formal program of reconciliation similar to the one that took place in South Africa to publicly document and expose the crimes of the regime with the purpose of creating a setting in which Burma can move forward?
The Human Rights Commission was appointed by the President, I think about almost 2 years back. I think they are not properly funded, and also because the Commission is made up of a large number of retired civil servants. I do not think that they are as proactive as we might wish it to be. I'm not aware that the Human Rights Commission has taken any steps that will radically change the human rights situation in Burma. The second question was?
About Truth and Reconciliation.
The Truth and Reconciliation. I've noticed that most of the calls for truth and reconciliation in Burma come from outside the country rather than from inside. There have been people who have spoken about the need for truth and reconciliation within the country, but not as many are, but those internal voices are not as many as the external ones. And I think it is in the end for the people of Burma to decide how they wish to come to terms with the past.
This questioner is interested in your commenting on your own political plans and future, and specifically, could you envision yourself as a candidate to become a future president of the country?
I didn't get the first part. My own?
Your own political plans and aims in the...
I think you have to think of me as part of a political party. I'm always surprised when people say, I think I must take you up on this, that I was, I had, what did you say at the beginning, transformed myself from a democracy icon to a member of the legislature or something like that. But
Parliamentary leader.
Parliamentary leader. I keep reminding people that I was a politician before I became a so-called democracy icon. I started out as a politician. I started out as a founding member of a political party. So if that's not a politician, I don't know what is. And as to whether or not I aspire to the leadership of the country, if you are going to be leading a party, you have to aspire to the leadership of the nation, because that means that your party will have won. And every party wants to win.
Question about the recent legislation on the investment. You mentioned responsible investment, and this question relates specifically to the foreign investment law that's been enacted, which is viewed as flawed by many foreign investors, and that is being under review or revisited. What's your sense of the strengths and weaknesses of that legislation and the future for new legislation on foreign investment?
There are a number of elements in the FDI law with which we, the NLD, are not in agreement. But of course, I think you heard earlier that there are 44 of us in 651 strong legislature. So I think you will understand that we cannot always make the amendments that we wish to make to draft laws. But My main concern with regard to that law is that it gives too much power to the Commission for Foreign Investment. And there are other parts of this law which I think should be changed, amended, to make investment more attractive to good investors. But as you say, there are flaws. Yes, there are flaws. But it does not mean that these flaws cannot be corrected. Because one of the pleasant surprises of entering the legislature a couple of months ago was to discover that the legislature is a more democratic institution than I had thought it would be. And although we are a minority, we are given a voice, and we are treated very fairly, and we can talk with other members of the legislature, we can discuss issues with them, we are listened to with sincerity and with respect. So we in the NLD would feel quite free to suggest to other members of the legislature that changes need to be made. And I don't think our words will fall on deaf ears.
This question has to do with the Occupy movement in the United States. And the question is whether, as someone who has given so much of your own life to fight for democracy, what are your thoughts about the U.S. Occupy movement and the demonstrations associated with ending property violence by some of the protesters? So I'm not sure if you have been following closely the Occupy Wall Street movement or various
no, not
offsprings?
closely, but I know about it. It's always a problem, isn't it, balancing democratic rights with democratic responsibilities. Where does one end and where does one begin? What should you do as a responsible citizen to safeguard the rights of citizens? And what should you not do not to infringe on the rights of other citizens? This will always be an ongoing problem. Such issues will keep coming up. What I would like to say is that if in Burma these were the only issues that we had to think about, we'd be very well off.
Again, from the perspective of this audience in the Bay Area, we have people here who are from the business community, from the academic community, from government leaders. The question is really, what kind of commitment would you see as being helpful from the different segments of the Bay Area society? Investors, political leaders, entrepreneurs, those interested in the recovery and the development of Burma. What particular forms of help would be most useful?
It would be different for different groups, wouldn't it? For example, for investors, businessmen, as I said earlier, we would like to make sure that your investments are democracy and human rights friendly. That is to say that these are the kind of investments that will help to empower the people. In fact, all those groups wish to help. Their help should be geared towards empowering the people and decreasing their dependency on the government. If you give the kind of help that will strengthen the influence of the central government over the lives of the people, and you thereby increase their dependency on the government, you will not really be helping the progress of democracy. So we would like you to give your help in such a way that local governments are empowered, civil society is empowered, that people are empowered through education, through better health, through better education, and through the creation of jobs, through the establishment of non-formal education enterprises. All these things will go to create a situation in which our people will be able to decide for themselves how they want to run their country. But the kind of help that helps only those already in power and influence will not in the long run be a positive force for our democracy.
You've been extremely generous. I'd like to invite the chairman of the board of the Asia Foundation, Ambassador Michael Armacost, to come and say a few brief words of thanks and to make a small presentation.
Let Mike have it.
Thank you very much.
Perfect. Aung San Suu Kyi, on behalf of the Board of Trustees and all our guests and friends, I want to tell you how much we appreciate your sharing your experience and your wisdom with us this afternoon. I had the privilege of meeting our distinguished guest once before. It was 15 years ago, and you were under house arrest. And I look at you today, and I think only of the old gospel hymn, "Thank God Almighty, free at last." We have watched the leadership you've provided in propelling your country under changing circumstances toward the things we believe in: good governance, the rule of law, the empowerment of women, the advancement of human rights. I take to heart the cautionary notes that you've offered about the appropriate pace of change. And we've worked in Asia for more than 50 years. We're proud to have been in Burma from 1958, 1962. We're grateful that Dave Steinberg, who's sitting over here, was working in our office when we were expelled. And he's still here, providing guidance to us as we prepare to reestablish a presence in your country. From our standpoint, since we believe in good governance and the rule of law, we wish to do whatever we can to support you and your colleagues in fulfilling your national aspirations at a pace that seems proper to you and comfortable to your country, men and women. So we thank you for giving us your time this afternoon. We think of San Francisco as the gateway to the Asia-Pacific region, so we hope you'll visit us often, and we plan to see that you see the Asia Foundation in your country. Thank you very much for coming. Now,